if you're a consumer, really what you want from a company is them to tell you a story about your future that is true and possible.
Brands and businesses need to remember they're the mentor, and the hero of the story is your consumer. It's your audience. It's who you're designing it for.
Welcome to Career EQ, a resource for aspiring young professionals navigating the job search process and the early part of their careers. Your host is John Quinn, Senior Lecturer of Marketing at the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University.
Welcome back to Career EQ. Today we have a very special episode. We're going to talk about storytelling in the context of the business world. So what can movies and great American novels tell us about how to tell a story in the workplace? Well, we're going to find out from two experts. We have Shane Meeker from Proctor Gamble, and we also have Angus Fletcher from The Ohio State University. Welcome to Career EQ.
Hi there. My name is Shane Meeker, and I teach storytelling all around the world to companies everywhere. And it's because I love movies. I'm also the Proctor Gamble Company Historian and Corporate Storyteller.
And my name is Angus Fletcher. I'm a professor at Ohio State in story science. I work at Project Narrative, which is the world's leading academic institute for the study of story. And my expertise is how stories work in the brain. So my background's in neurophysiology, and I'm interested not just in how the brain processes story, but how it invents story.
Very cool. All right. Well, welcome to Career EQ, Shane and Angus. Shane and Angus, it sounds like you guys should be in like an 80s Australian heavy metal band. So, Shane, you probably like the sound of that, don't you?
I do.
So, Angus, help us kick us off on this topic. One of your areas of expertise is story engineering. What is story engineering, and how do you first get interested in it?
So I got interested in story engineering about 15 years ago when I was teaching at Stanford, and I was lucky enough to start working with a bunch of people at Pixar. And I was interested in how it was that Pixar was developing these really radical new stories that were incredibly popular. Because I thought to myself, if you can create a new story and have it work, that's the secret to everything. So I was lucky enough to go inside Pixar a little bit, talk to some people, and of course, it's an engineering company. It wasn't founded by Steve Jobs. It was essentially taken over by him. And he had this method, which you could say is essentially a form of UX or reverse engineering for how you generate stories by working backwards from the effect you're trying to create or the consumer you're trying to reach. And so that's what I mean when I talk about story engineering. I'm really interested in the way that you say to yourself, what am I trying to get this story to do? And then you work backwards and you create a new original structure to achieve that effect.
Very interesting, yeah. And that starting from the end and kind of working backward, I think that's probably going to come back in our conversation here a little bit later. Shane, I mentioned earlier that I wouldn't consider myself a big movie buff, but I know for certain that you are.
Yes.
What draws you to movies, and how have you leveraged this in your career at Procter & Gamble?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, I mean, movies for me start going all the way back to 1977, Star Wars, when I actually went to theaters and was able to see that. And I started drawing because of movies. I became an industrial designer, where I got my degree, by the way, at The Ohio State University. And also because of movies, I got to also do a project with Industrial Light and Magic, which was George Lucas's company at the time, and work on the Star Wars re-releases actually back in '97. So it was funny. Star Wars got me drawing, and then also got to work on it. Nothing I worked on got used, by the way, but I can still say worked on it. And then I came to P&G, where I worked in our design function, but I was always convinced I could take my love of film and of storytelling and use it somehow in my day-to-day. And eventually proposed to one of my bosses that I teach storytelling, because on the side, I'd been taking classes out in Hollywood, along with taking classes in many other cities. And she said, well, I guess, yeah, start teaching it. And I started teaching it to R&D, and then to marketing, and then to sales, and then to finance, and then to design, and all the different functions. I've been doing it ever since. And P&G is really cool too. As long as I take vacation, they let me teach externally. And I've taught at Disney and FedEx and Nike and companies like that all around the world, because everyone's got great stories to tell. And quite frankly, I am a huge believer that all business problems can be solved with what works in Star Wars, which is a great, compelling, interesting, engaging, and informative story.
So, Angus, what is one of your favorite movies or maybe novels, and how does it illustrate or maybe exemplify good storytelling, and what can it teach us about storytelling in the business world context?
So one of my favorite movies is Up by Pixar, and that's actually the movie that I learned how to reverse engineer on, so maybe it's a good example for me to talk through. So what is the point of Up? Well, the point of Up is up. The point of Up is to take you up. And they created a script, a very powerful script, which is all about lifting up an old man in a balloon house and taking him up. And they showed an early version of the script to people, and people found it incredibly boring. They said, why should I care about this old man? I don't want to go up. And so they sat down, and this is what you do with reverse engineering, is you say, well, if I want to take people up, where do I have to start them? Well, what I have to do is I have to start them down. And actually, the key to making a movie like Up work is I have to figure out how to make the beginning as low as possible. So I'm not going to spoil the beginning of Up for anyone, but if you haven't seen the beginning of Up for anyone, I just want to say that it's a masterpiece in tragedy, and it is one of the sort of most powerful short pieces that will make you cry in about 4 or 5 minutes. And so,
I know I did.
Yeah. And so. Yeah, and so basically, that's a great example of how you can have an incredible story, but it doesn't work with an audience, and all you have to do is basically take that one more step backwards to connect with where your audience is.
Yeah, Shane, what about you? What about one of your favorite movies that could tell?
Yeah, favorite movies. My gosh, that's quite a list, by the way. I would even look at it a bit broader than a singular film and say, to me, all story structures kind of have a very similar layout, and understanding the building blocks behind them become really important. For example, pretty much the summation of every story is a hero must go through an obstacle to get to a treasure. Now, clearly, there's lots of details you can sprinkle about. You can change the orders. You can do all kinds of things, but you've got to have a source of empathy somewhere in there, which is the hero, which is the characters. You've got to have them want something, because desire is what drives stories forward. It drives the hero forward. And then you've got to have some kind of antagonistic force, because that's what challenges the hero and makes them want to grow and change, which we then want to follow them doing. And all of my favorite films, if you think about it, you can just jump right in the characters. I mean, I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and I could relate to Luke Skywalker when I was a kid. I mean, he was on a farm too in the beginning of that. Granted, we didn't, farm moisture like he did on Tatooine, but that still didn't make him any less relatable to me, and it allowed me to jump into the narrative. So Up is the same way. I think that's a great example that Angus brought up. That's a film that you jump right into very, very quickly. You feel with the character, and you want to see them achieve their goal, which is eventually realizing that you're never too old to live out your dreams.
Yeah, it was mentioned when we talked about Up, and maybe also think about Bambi. Bambi starts with a horrible tragedy also.
Yes.
So some people may have the perception that in the business world, we need to stick just to the facts and data. Please explain to me, what do we mean by storytelling in the business environment, and why that's important? Angus, you want to start us off on that?
Well, sure. I'm not a business person. I should just be honest about that. So my opinion should be taken with a grain of salt. But it's my experience that humans think in story. Humans don't think in data. And you can experience this in your own life. If I give you a statistic about how many people are killed in a particular war, it won't resonate with you that much. But if you look at the face of one child who's been displaced by that war, you'll have an immediate response to it. And the thing about the way that stories work in general is they create a human-to-human connection where we build a sense of trust and a sense that we know that person. So the term we often use is authenticity, a sense that we're getting real access to that person's interiority. And so the one thing that I always find hardest with businesses, but in the end I think is the most effective, is forcing them to be honest. Business people hate to be honest about their companies. They always want to spin things. They always want to say, how can I frame this story in the most effective way? How can I, in some way make customers believe that I'm perfect, and if they embrace my product, their lives will be perfect too. And of course, that's nonsense. No product is going to make you perfect, and no company is perfect. So the key always is to find that story that makes the person telling it a little bit uncomfortable, the story that they don't want to share, because that's actually what the audience wants to hear. Mm-hmm. And encouraging companies to have real vulnerability, to start to open themselves up, not pseudo vulnerability, but real vulnerability where they start to feel a little bit out of their comfort zone, and then figuring out how they can explain to the audience where that uncomfortable moment came from so the audience can appreciate it, that's where you get real empathy. It comes from candor, it comes from honesty. And I would say that audiences today are more savvy than ever and more able to see when there is kind of fraudulent marketing happening.
Yeah.
And that's why, as a business, if you really want to connect with people, you do have to be willing to make yourself a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. Shane, let's take that idea and maybe we could talk about a couple different examples of storytelling in a business sense. Like, what are some different applications that you coach some of your folks, either whether you're working as a consultant or working internally with Procter Gamble? What are some of the contexts in which you're coaching them and how to use storytelling?
Well, I mean, data and facts, by the way, totally agree with everything Angus said. And data and facts, I always go back to a quote Brent Dykes had at Forbes, which was, people hear statistics, but they feel stories. And so I think data and facts can be an incredibly powerful part of a narrative if you don't lose the emotion behind it. Too often, like he was saying, it's some giant number or something, which if I can't pull it down to individual relatability, it makes it very difficult for me to say, so why should I care about that? Why should I care about that? I often will coach them, if you've got to use data, especially if they're writing a proposal or something like it, use the data can be very important. Just make sure they understand the story behind the data. What is the emotion that those numbers represent that you're trying to share? Tell me the context and the scenario that data actually is trying to explain in a way that makes it easy to understand and very approachable. So it's data and facts, I think, can be an important part if they're handled correctly.
So let me follow up on that just for a second. So about making them feel something. So maybe this, for example, in the context of a consumer product. How does it change that consumer's target audience's life? How does it make their life better? How does it not only solve their job to be done, but how does it actually improve their quality of life?
Yeah, or how much money maybe it saves them over a year, or whatever that may be, as long as, again, it authentically, as Angus was saying, fits the story that they're trying to tell. And it makes it, I think, down to the individual. At P&G, for example, they always talk about how consumer is boss. So all the brands are always, get their insights, are developed for that particular consumer in mind. And to do that, you have to do research with them. You have to talk with your consumers. And brands have to kind of take on a very classic story archetype character called a mentor. And a mentor's job in a story is to guide and inspire the hero and to give the hero things that help them on their journey. Mm-hmm. So, Obi-Wan talked the Force and gave Luke a lightsaber, and, everyone from Dumbledore to Gandalf to the fairy godmother to Glinda the Good Witch to, pick your storyline, but there's always a mentor character there. And brands and businesses need to remember they're the mentor, and the hero of the story is your consumer. It's your audience. It's who you're designing it for, because it's their journey that you're jumping into, not the other way around. And so also reminding brands and businesses to always, I call it unleashing your inner Dumbledore, becomes important.
Okay, all right. So let's talk a little bit about maybe some specific situations. Like, say you're going to do a 20 to 30 minute presentation versus a 30 to 60 second chance encounter with the CEO in the hallway or in the elevator. Mm-hmm. What role does storytelling play in these type of environments, and how can you use it to be more effective in your communication, whether it's just to the CEO in the elevator or is it to maybe the executive staff in a boardroom? Shane, you want to start off with that one?
Sure. So there is two kinds of presentations in many ways. There's information and there's story. By the way, information is not a story, but a story can also contain information. Those are different. So I often will, coach people that are new to the company. If you're new to a company and you're in the hall and your boss stops you and asks if the project you're working on is on track, do not tell them a story. All right, they don't need a story there. What they need is a piece of information, which is, yes, it is, or no, it's not, and here's what we're doing. That's different than if they stop you and ask, so why are we doing this project at all again? That has the opportunity for a story, because now, again, I have to explain who the story is for, what they're after, and what's in their way, which are those three building blocks again: a hero, an obstacle, and a treasure. Who the story's about, what they're after, and what's in their way. So deciding what you need and always having those two tools ready. Do I need a piece of information? Do I need a story? Or do I need a story with information in? is always a choice that you have to be ready to make, depending upon who your audience is and how much time you have.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Angus, you mentioned something earlier about how effective storytelling actually resonates and sticks with the audience more than just giving facts and figures. Tell us a little bit about like why that is true, and maybe an example in a business context, like in a proposal in a meeting.
So, what did the human brain evolve to do? It didn't evolve to compute data.
Yeah.
It evolved to win.
Yeah, and survive.
How do you win?
Mm-hmm.
You have a better plan than the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
What is a plan? A plan is another word for a plot. What is another word for a plot? It's a story. So what the brain evolved to do is it evolved to make stories of the future and then make them real. And so what defines an intelligent person is their ability to come up with stories that are new, so they're able to act in ways outside of what their competitors are trying, but they're also possible. So if I just sit around in my room and imagine that I'm a wizard, that's not going to get me anywhere, even if it's the newest and most interesting wizard of all time, right? So the reason that stories are really interesting to the human brain is because the brain is always on the hunt for good stories. And if you're a consumer, really what you want from a company is them to tell you a story about your future that is true and possible. And a lot of bad marketing essentially involves lying to customers about how, well, you know, if you take this product, that'll make your life better, or so on and so forth. But it doesn't. But good marketing helps audiences see how a product is actually going to improve their lives. So, you know, I mean, a very simple classic example, the Just Do It campaign by Nike. And if you remember the very first ad for that, it's just a 30-second ad, but it's one of the most revolutionary ads people don't realize this, but before Nike released that ad, it was on a severe downward trend, and that entire campaign turns them around.
Was it we're talking very early 1990s?
No, I think it was 1980s.
80s?
Yeah, I think it was 1980s, mid-80s. What happens in that ad? Well, you just see like this really old guy running really slowly across a bridge. And in your mind, you're like, who is that dude? What is he doing? He's got like this weird tattoo on his chest, you know? And, you know, over the course of the ad, what it's revealed to you is this is someone who gets up every morning and does this run. And he's not a track star, you know, he's not a hero. He does it. Why does he do it, right? Why does he do it? Because he wants to do it. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind the advertising campaign is, look, if you put on these shoes, you can do things that you want to do too. You can do hard things too. And so when you watch this campaign, what you start imagining to yourself is like, what bridges do I want to cross? Or marathons do I want to run? And you develop an emotional connection to the shoe because the shoe to you on some level is about unleashing your potential as a human. And it's about imagining a future story in which you can do anything. And so that's what effective stories do, is effective stories open up your sense of potential and possibility. They don't sell you things. Yeah. I mean, the thing about being sold something is it makes you dependent on the product. Nobody wants that. What they want instead is a shoe that allows them to run faster. What they want instead is a piece of tech that allows them to think faster, you know. So that's why that story connection is important to humans. That's why we don't think in data. I mean, we live in a world where I think we've been brainwashed to think that data is more important than it is. But the thing to remember about life is always changing, and change breaks data. Mm-hmm. What was true statistically yesterday is not true statistically today. Yeah. Whereas stories, by their very nature, live in the future.
Oh, that's a very cool thought. So Shane, Angus mentioned about the Nike example and telling a story.
Yeah.
How about one from Procter Gamble that actually tells a story about how it actually makes the consumer's life actually better?
Sure. So one of my favorite campaigns was from Swiffer, and it's called the Lee and Morty campaign, and it's got this older couple on it, and basically it starts off with her getting out a stepladder because she needs to dust at a high shelf, and she's getting out a stepladder, and in her feather duster to step up to do it.
I know the spot you're talking about.
Yeah, and her husband says, "Whoa, stop! That is not a safe thing to do. That is not a safe thing to do." And he even says there's got to be a better way to do this. And the doorbell rings, and there's this big green box out waiting for them, which is the Swiffer box. And they open it up, and inside is the duster with the extendable handle and the top that bends down so that you can turn it, parallel to whatever surface that you're dusting. And she comments immediately, "Oh, wow, I can extend this. Oh, I can turn it this way. Oh, now I can step up there without getting up on the ladder." And again, that's a great example of who it's for and the story's about, what they're after, and what's in their way. I can answer all of those. And the consumer again is the hero of that story. They're the focus, and the brand is just stepping in to try to help inspire and provide an item that helps them on their journey. And in that case, the journey was just one simple thing, which was being able to dust in hard to reach places, and that was it.
Yeah. So check the episode notes. I'm going to put links to both of those spots in the episode notes. Let's talk a little bit about story form and structure. Now, when I was in graduate school, I was lucky enough to see Kurt Vonnegut speak. He talked about different story arcs, and I'm sure you oversimplified it. But
there's a classic talk, by the way. That's
and he talks about the bell curve. Yeah. Main character has nothing, gets everything, loses everything. Great Gatsby, right, would kind of follow that kind of story arc, right? And then there's the inverse where everything's great, everything falls apart, and then kind of regains some sort of glory. I'm struggling for an example of that one right now. But he said, I like stories that just start off awful and then everything just goes to hell. And he did this big dramatic, marker on the whiteboard swoosh downward. But let's talk a little bit about form and structure. And story arc. What are the primary components of a good business story, and what is the structure?
Well, you shouldn't ask me because I don't believe in structure. So why don't we kick that one over, and then I'll talk about why I don't believe in structure later.
We'll have both points of view then. All right, go ahead. Start us off, Shane.
I think that there is some fundamental mapping, if you will, that you can always do. But I also am a believer that, a lot of it you can customize and do as necessary. I would think in some kind of arc, if you want to use that terminology, there is kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end of a sort. Now, you don't have to be linear with that. You definitely don't have to do it that way. But think of it more as kind of how Aristotle used to talk about there's a setup, there's a challenge, and there's a resolution. You decide how that's going to bring it to life. And the resolution doesn't have to be the end either. I mean, sequels are built off the idea that they don't necessarily have to resolve it and that they can keep going over time if necessary too. But it's a good way to kind of plan things. And I often, when I'm creating something, I will start with an end in mind and work backwards, quite frankly, too, which I also find as a helpful thing. So I think structure, much like Campbell used to talk a lot, is never meant to be followed too literally, but more as a way to help outline and organize thoughts that then you find a way to very creatively bring it to life and do something different with. But a helpful outline, for sure. For sure. But I would be very careful following those two systematically. Yeah.
Angus?
Well, so I think the main thing that's important about a story is that it works. And I think there's a lot of structures that you can take that work. And I think if you find a structure that's effective for you, whether that's a hero's journey or whatever, and that works for you in that context, you should use it. It's the same thing like if you're building a car, right? And Four Wheels happens to work for your car, you should go ahead and use it. But I just find when you go into businesses and you start talking about structure, it gets them away from the main thing, which is candor, emotional vulnerability, and also just novelty. What audiences want is they want a sense that something new has arrived. And when you think about a movie like Star Wars, part of the reason that it's amazing is because there's all this crazy new stuff in it. I mean, there's Wookiees, there's lightsabers, there's all this stuff that as a child, you're like, that's amazing. I want to go in that world and I want to play in that world and I want to see what happens when I'm in that world. And what novelty does is it makes you into the hero of the story. And I think it's really important to remember as a business that your job is to make the customer the hero of the story and not make yourself the hero of the story. Mm-hmm. And of course, you could have a customer in the story who's your hero and you're giving the example, but you don't need to. You can just fire their imagination. Apple's famous 1984 commercial doesn't really have a customer in it, right, who's a hero. But you as the audience watching are like, yeah, man, I want to smash that stuff. I want to break out of that world. So, the main thing I would say, particularly to anyone who's thinking about starting a marketing campaign now, is you can bring in a lot of very talented storytellers who can help you fix the ending or the beginning of a story once you've got the raw material. But the raw material is what you really need to focus on. And the raw material comes from making that extra emotional cut and really thinking hard about, to take the example of the Swifter, what I love about that example is that sense that the husband really cares about his wife.
Yeah.
I mean, and you want to be that person. You want to be that family person who's like, really sitting there, not just being like, oh, yeah, I expect my wife to clean the house. I expect the meal to be on the table. You're like, whoa, I'm going to intervene here and take a duty of care and protectorship, and I think that's one of the reasons that works so well. So I think encouraging people to make that extra human dig, and that's why I say I'm against structure. Not because I think structure is bad, but because I think that when you start to focus on that, you get formula.
Yeah. And
when you get formula, you get predictability. And when you get predictability, people don't really tune in.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. So when I talk to my students, and whether I'm coaching them on a case competition or for presentations, I urge them to incorporate an element of storytelling, and I talk a little bit about like the components of storytelling, and they seem to struggle with an inspiration for the story. So, so what advice might you give them to find inspiration, be able to weave a story into their proposal, their presentation, their case competition, whatever it may be? How do they kind of find that nugget of a story?
I guess I'll just hop in here and I'll say I think the thing to do is look for something that surprised you. Mm-hmm. Surprise is always the beginning of any good story. It's the hook, because you wonder what's going to happen next. And so starting to think to yourself, when I interacted with this product, what was the moment when I was surprised by something that it did? Or when I walked into this company, what was I surprised by? Or when I was looking at that person on the street who didn't have the product, what was I surprised by what they were doing? And if you can give audiences that experience of surprise at the beginning of your presentation, where you're like, isn't this kind of crazy? I mean, they'll be like, yeah, that is kind of crazy. And then you're like, well, I'm going to explain it to you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to explain it to you. Just listen to me over the next, 5 minutes, and I'll explain to you, why it is that way. And so it's a little bit like setting up, a puzzle or a mystery or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I would say if you're having a hard time finding a story, go back to your own sense of surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shane,
love that. Yeah. Love surprise. And plus that makes it distinctive and more memorable, right? And then I would also suggest that sometimes it's helpful to start with thematics and think. So let's say they're going to an interview and they know that this company is looking for someone who is a problem solver, is a leader, and also makes creative connections between things. They're looking for that. Great. Then ask yourself, with those core thematics in mind, what personal stories do I have that would bring those ideas to life? And they wouldn't necessarily even have to be things that they've done as much as they've recognized and seen. So it could be something else that's happened to someone like, yeah, you know what? I'll never forget. I had a partner for one of these projects and we did this and we did that. And I remember them having this learning. And ever since that project, I've always thought differently about it now because I saw what they learned. I mean, it could be something that's happened to someone else. Yeah. But the key is they can start to create a toolbox of all these different key thematics that in their position, their job, their career, whatever it is that they maybe do need to be ready to talk about, and just organize stories underneath each of those. That's why TED conferences always have a thematic. Every TED conference pretty much has a core theme, right? And then they look for people to speak to that theme. It's a way to still have lots of varieties of answers, but keep them all organized under kind of an idea.
Yeah.
I think one other thing maybe that'd be important to remember too is that the human brain is incredibly egocentric. And so what we know is that when I start telling a story about myself, your brain is going to start thinking about, does that remind me about a story about myself? Mm-hmm. And this is why whenever we have conversations with people, you get halfway through the story and the other person interrupts you. It's like, the same thing happened to me. Or let me tell you about this, right?
So my wife tells me I do that all the time. But I can tell her now that's normal, right?
That's totally normal.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And a good thing. It's good. That's creating relatability. So that's fantastic. Yeah.
And so just remember when you're telling a story that really your job is to prompt the other person to have that experience. Mm-hmm. And the way you do that is you try and maintain a certain level of general ability of experience, and, if you talk about, the first time you made like a horrible mistake, when you walked into a business room, everybody will be like, oh, I remember I did that too, And so I would just say, when you are telling stories, think about personal moments in your life that are true, that are candid, but that other people will be reminded of their own personal lives.
And they found relatable.
Yeah.
So, Angus, you said something earlier about an element of surprise early in the proposal or the presentation. And I often get this question from students, like, should I tell them what my solution is up front, or should I tell them what it is towards the end? What are your recommendations for that? Like, can you have an element of surprise without revealing what the resolution is, and you still hold the resolution for the end? How would you recommend structuring that in that sort of context?
Yeah, so it depends on what's really novel about your approach. So, let's say what's novel about your approach is your method, like you have some kind of, new method for doing something. Then go ahead and tell them the answer up front. So I came up with this answer, right? Because the surprise is how you got there. Whereas if you're using a regular method that everybody knows, but you have a surprising result, then you want to hold off, I would say, your answer until the end. So really what you're always trying to do is you're always trying to move your audience. The goal is to move your audience. And in general, I do think it's better to move audiences emotionally than intellectually. Yeah. But if you are going to move them intellectually, then, and by intellectually I mean, here's a problem and here's the answer.
Analysis and the data.
Right. Then yes, you want to hold off at least part of your solution to the end.
Yeah. Shane, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. There's a classic kind of construct to kind of remember that works really well with people, which is storytelling is basically a balance of understanding time against emotion. The more time that progresses, the more emotion you have to create, which is why big battles are always at the end. It's also why, by definition, the word climax in a story is somewhere towards the end. Because if you start off with the most emotional moment, by definition, where can emotion only go after that?
Yeah.
Downward. It has to go down, which is why, when I spoke at TED, one of the things that the folks at the thing that I spoke at, they said, do not start off with your most powerful story. Start off with a story that's going to set the tone, get everyone kind of pulled in and really engage them, put your content in the middle, but then end with a story that ties it all together, and has that, because by proximity, that's the last thing that, that they're going to remember. I mean, even when I was at OSU, I remember at professional practices course in the design school, our instructor told us, when you're at the interview, do not start off with your best project. Start off with your second best project. Show them that sets the tone. Put your core skills in the middle and end with your best project that you think totally represents everything together. Because again, proximity, that's the last thing they're going to see. And you want them walking away with that. So I love that idea of, if it's the process, give them the answer up front, that sets up, and then say, but what I really want to share with you is how we got there, because I really discovered a couple cool things while we did this that is going to change how I'm going to do my work from now on. Then lead into that, right? So deciding what you want that climax of your story to be is another great planning tool too. It helps you kind of lay out how you want to put things in there. How do you set it up without giving away too much? How do you still hook them though in the beginning and get them interested enough so that they are there till the end when you expose that? But think of that buildup over time and really think of, when they walk away, what is the emotion you want them to feel as they leave? Does your story deliver on that?
Yeah. Well, Shane and Angus, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to start implementing some of these ideas in the classroom that we talked about, and in my coaching with my project teams, because as you both mentioned, it's not a formula, right? It has a lot to do with what you want to reveal, when you want to reveal it, and an element of surprise and novelty. So, and hopefully I can help use this to take some of my teams to the next level. And so thank you so much for joining us and for discussing what makes good storytelling, and it helps us be more effective and successful in our careers. This has been very informative and fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.